One of the great truths that we all live with in life is that we have a perspective that's shaped by our past, our background, our experiences in life, and we see things and kind of operate and go through the world with this fundamental perspective, and it kind of colors everything we see. This is very, very true. This was very, very true of me in terms of my own studio. Things that I thought were just the most natural in the world, as I networked and got to know other studio owners, I found, that isn't actually that natural. And, that person has a really great idea. I'd never thought about that. So one of the things I think that has changed in my life over the last 8 years as I've, networked with thousands of school owners is I've begun to see patterns in how owners operate their businesses. But what's interesting with our guest today is that he has a perspective because he has a perspective has been born out of working with mid-size and larger academies. And he's worked with smaller academies as well, but he's seen kind of this vast range of academies all over the world. And we want to invite Sam on today to kind of share that perspective. And I'm very excited about this episode because I think there's going to be a view here, and there's things I talked about with Sam prior to this episode that kind of opened my eyes to some realities that even in the role that I have as kind of a marketing consultant, I'd never seen before. So we're really excited to have Sam on the podcast today from opus1.io. Sam, welcome. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Nice being here. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited too. I know we've been planning this for a while, so super excited to be here.
For sure.
Sam, so I love the fact that you have had so many conversations with mid-size and larger schools, as Daniel said.
So the stated topic today is that Sam's going to share with us patterns he sees in the most successful schools that work with Opus. Before we jump into those patterns, though, Sam, I think we should introduce you to the audience. Yeah. I'd love for you to give the audience a little bit of your background, how you came to found Opus, and just introduce yourself to those who perhaps don't know you. I know a large portion of our audience will, but for those who don't, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people don't know me yet. So my name is Sam. I'm both the founder and CEO of opus1.io, which is a platform for that was built for managing music schools end to end. And I'll probably be plugging it in, as I talk, because obviously it shapes a lot of my experience with music schools. But the story about how I started opus1.io and why I started is because I'm also a music school owner. Actually, my wife, when I met her before we were married, obviously had started a music school. And like most music school owners, she was struggling to get to the next level. And we'll be talking about some of those struggles in this episodes and many others, I assume. So I got to, my background is in tech and business overall. I'm passionate by technology, but I'm passionate about music as well. I played multiple instruments for fun myself. So when I met my wife and I saw, her growing her music school and seeing certain challenges, and as we got engaged and then married, and I got more and more involved into running her school and helping her and seeing all these challenges. And we, over the years, I would say solve a lot of these challenges. So I got to see my own experience growing in music school with my wife from about 100-something students that she had when I met her to today we have 1,400 students. We're going on 1,600 over 3 locations in Silicon Valley. And kind of like, halfway through that journey, so about 7 years ago, almost, we can say, because we were going through different software that were just really bad and really just not built for music schools, right? We were using various software that were really built for gyms and yoga studios and that were pretending to handle music schools. And over time, I got her school off of pen and paper and Google Calendar in the beginning, which I know some schools still operate at that level when you have a very small school, which is completely, usual. So we tried different software over the years, and until at some point I quit my full-time job in Silicon Valley in tech, and I decided to build opus1.io, and we've grown opus1.io now to what is I think fair to say becoming maybe not the leader yet in the music school management software, but at least one that's fastest growing, let's just say that. And so I get to now with my team talked to hundreds of music schools that we've onboarded on Opus One.io and are using our product today. And so I got to see their challenges and how they address it. I get to see some best practices emerge over time. A lot that, I've also implemented at my own school, obviously. And sometimes things, differences in opinion as well, where I've seen some things that did not necessarily work for me or that I did not assume would work for me in Palo Alto, but has worked for others. So I'm going to try to kind of like share a mix of experiences that, not just myself at Opus One.io, but also my head of sales, my head of customer success, who also talk to music schools all day long, where things that we've seen work well versus, things that sometimes don't work so well. And maybe also some tips and tricks and things that I've done at my school that I know are a little bit more unique and that have worked very well for us. And hopefully that will be helpful for music school owners that are listening.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great introduction. It gives a lot of background. And I would just make one addition and say that I want to point out what he said. It's from his experiences with actual music schools that has led him to identify these, what I'll call patterns of success in the most successful schools that Sam interacts with. And he has a unique view on these schools because not only has he talked to the owner and gotten the narrative, but he can see the data on the back end of their program, their software, and he can see who the most successful schools are. And so that is where this experience comes from. So I think we really have a unique view here into the business practices of these large schools, the patterns of success of these large schools, choices that those owners make, and what those choices lead to. So, Sam, let's not delay. Where should we start here? I know you have a list. So
I have, try to organize my thoughts and be structured. And, obviously you guys love if you interrupt me and if you, touch on certain points, I'm happy to explain more. Probably the first point I want to highlight here is that it's very tough for a musician to turn a business owner, right? I mean, I'm sure that I'm stating the obvious here, right? So it's not like you go to school for this, right? You don't, like I said, you don't go get an MBA and start a business. So you usually have no clue what you're doing. To be fair, you start a business, and by just adding one more teacher, 2 teachers, 3 teachers, and then you all of a sudden run a business, which you may not have been trained for. I've seen it with my wife. I've seen it with hundreds of music school owners. And I mean, the trivial thing that I can say here is that music school owners need help, right? Because they need to, and it's okay to ask for help. There's just so much that you have to learn in your multi-year journey on how to run a business. So wherever you get that help, I would say, if anybody listening, first of all, you're not alone, because every music school started that way. So at least knowing that you're not alone, I think, is a big help. The problems that you encounter as a music school owner, thousands of others have experienced it, right? So this is very typical and very normal to start that way.
This episode is sponsored by BigMusicGames.com. As our listeners know, Brooklyn Music Factory is all about a fun, fluency-first approach to music lessons. And at the foundation of our teaching methods are rhythm, melody, harmony, and songwriting games that challenge students as young as 4 years old to train their ears and flex that musical mind. Because when you set an intention of gamifying every single lesson, you're going to find improved attendance, increased play at home, and higher student retention. So we've set up a website just for our listeners so you can start playing today. Go to bigmusicgames.com/7FMS and create your free account. Again, that's bigmusicgames.com/7FMS. And if you join today, I'm going to send you a personal invite to join our weekly teacher training call with me and Greggy Bizzle, our chief game designer. Go ahead and put play back into practice with Big Music Games. I hear exactly what you're saying, and I wanted to actually ask you one little more detailed question, then ping it back to Daniel on this. But when you said that you see a lot of these teams get together with in-house expertise, you sort of brushed over some of the in-house expertise by saying like marketing and sales, et cetera. Where in your experience do you see, first of all, most of the expertise being, i.e., with that partner who has a business background? And then another question is, where do you see the greatest opportunity for expertise that's usually lacking?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, first of all, I'm going to tell you, just like for me, when I got involved in helping my wife run our music school, I'm actually more business, and I've been business on the product side of things. I was working in tech and tech, tech and business, but product related. I'm not a great marketer. Still don't think I am. I'm not a great salesperson. Still, I wasn't then, and I learned a lot. But yeah, so I learned a lot over time. And I think, no matter how good that team is, there are experts in sales, there are experts in marketing, there are experts in operations, right? There are experts in customer service. It's very rare to find somebody that's an expert at all of these. And you kind of have to become as good as you can on all of these fronts to run a small business. Marketing is a little bit easier because you can hire a marketing agency. They can do your website, they can do your ads, right? So those also are not cheap, right? You can start maybe a little bit cheaper and do things yourself, but over time, when you get big enough, I hired a marketing agency that's handling all my ads, all the conversions. They give me accurate tracking. I know exactly what I'm spending, and we could have done it early on, right? They cost a few $1,000s a month, if I include my ad spend and their cost. So I think you have to accept that based on your size, you may not be able to afford all these things, but and I'll talk a little bit about that concept again, but you're going to have to spend money to make money, right? You're going to have to really grow and invest in your business to grow it. It's going to take several years. But marketing, for example, is something you can hire for at different scales. So maybe you can start with somebody on Upwork that's a little bit cheaper, that handle your ads, but then over time you get somebody more experienced. And I know, for example, for us, when we got to a certain size, having a marketing agency that we were probably spending $5,000 on Google Ads. And my wife and then me started to set those up ourselves. And it was a disaster, right? I mean, we did what we could. And I even had the Google rep help me. But by the way, the Google rep is not there to help you. The Google Ads rep is there to maximize their sales and maximize their use of their product, but not to get you the best results. So yeah, over time we got big enough, and I hired a marketing agency, and guess what? We actually lower our ad spends, but the result, right? The return of investment was much better, right? So over time you get big enough that as you get to certain stages, you're gonna start, being able to afford, stronger people in your team as contractors or as full-time employee that gonna gather these kind of operations. But it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's not like you're gonna raise and borrow a bunch of money to hire a team, and you got to do this very organically. It's going to take a few years. But yeah, so these are kind of I hope that answers your question. You're going to have to gather that skill set and grow it over time, and always reinvest in your business to grow it so that you get these skills in.
This episode is sponsored by GroupLessons.com. If you're looking for a group piano method that is easy to implement in your studio or school, look no farther than Piano Express from GroupLessons.com. Because unlike most group piano methods, Piano Express allows students to make individual progress within the context of a larger group. And because of the at-home practice tools and gamified curriculum, students using the Piano Express method make faster progress than the average method book student. And that helps students feel excited, accomplished, and motivated to learn new music. Also, the system is really adaptable. We've got teachers using the system in their home studios, and we have many large commercial studios running our 3-room model that allows you to see up to 24 students per hour with just 2 teachers. So if you'd like to learn more about Piano Express, navigate to grouplessons.com and sign up for a free demo. You'll get to look at the method, our app and teacher guides, and we'll even give you a sneak peek of our implementation plan that has helped hundreds of studios start their group program in just a few weeks. Sam, so definitely hearing that first point you're making there, that you're noticing these studio owners get help, they get the support that they need, whether it's a business coach or things like that. Maybe, kind of going into number 2 here. I'm curious what your number 2 is, doing monthly billing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I have a whole blog article on this. And funny enough, monthly billing is very common in the US. But when we talk, we've seen a few schools that didn't do monthly and switched to monthly when we talked to them and when they switched to Opus 1.io. Culturally, we noticed that in the UK, for example, in Australia, they do more terms billing. And actually, we kind of convinced also some schools to switch. We support also term billing. It's not as automated in Opus 1.io as it is when you do monthly. But we've convinced a few schools, and actually, those majority, I think, I'm not aware of any that regretted switching to monthly. So we actually, funny enough, have that conversation more with schools outside of the US. But I mean, on the monthly billing, there's a lot of things to say. I'll try to kind of summarize these points very quickly. And I have a blog article, if you guys don't mind linking it in the description.
We could probably drop that in the show notes, no doubt.
Yeah. So for example, the first one is that the friction of the initial enrollment, right? If you enroll somebody in the first month, they pay for the first month only. And they maybe the first month's prorated, because then you align your billing on the first of the month, which we usually do. You have a lower barrier to entry. If you come into my school, you have a trial lesson, and you're like, okay, that school looks nice, and my kid liked that teacher, I want to sign up, and you ask me for a 6 months upfront commitment, and I don't know yet if my kid is going to love piano or not. I don't know yet if I'm going to really like your school. You're asking for a much higher, you're adding friction, right? Whereas if you say, hey, no commitment, month-to-month payment, just sign up and you pay for the first month's prorated, much easier to get the customer in the first place, right? So that easier barrier to entry, right? Now, the next thing is most of the things that we pay in our lives are monthly, right? Our rent is monthly. Usually our paychecks are once or twice a month, usually. Most of utilities are monthly. Our mortgages are monthly. Our gym is monthly. Our HBO, our Netflix, most of the expenses that we pay, right? The huge majority are monthly. So people tend to like something predictable and monthly, right? Where I know what my budget is. I know my lessons are going to cost me $300 a month. That's what my monthly cost. Whereas if I have to pay up front for 6 months, it's a lot more money up front, or 3 months. And so that monthly habit is just easier. Now, the other thing that I want to say on monthly very quickly is that the opposite argument that I hear from music school owners, sometimes they tell me, well, if I charge them for 6 months up front, they're locked in for 6 months, right? True, but first of all, people don't like to be locked in, right? That's the first thing. You want to lock them with a great product, and you already have a great product if you have great teachers. And we all know that learning music is a journey that's going to last for years. So if you have good facilities, great teachers, and we'll talk about other things like flexible makeup policy, things like that, you have what we call a sticky product. You have a product that you don't need to lock people in, right? Another example I give is like, a lot of services out there that are billed monthly sometimes want to lock you in for several months. Why do they do that? They do that because they know they don't have a sticky product. They know there's a lot of competition out there. They know that, I'm taking the example of HBO, they might want to sell you a 6 months subscription because you might just subscribe for a month, binge watch Game of Thrones and then stop it. But you don't do that for music. You have a sticky product. If they love your teacher, they got to do lessons monthly anyway. And most of the time, they're going to continue for years with your school. So locking them in doesn't have much value. And when you do lock them in, and if they do want to quit because they broke their arm or they really can't take piano anymore, they're moving out of state, guess what? They're going to ask for a refund anyway. So you haven't really locked them in with your 6 months contract or your 6 months commitment. So let your product, let your offering be the sticky thing, be what keeps people in your studio. Streamline your payments and make the payments and the lowest friction at the initial enrollment. Another point that people bring up usually when we talk about monthly billing versus those upfront payments is cash flow management. So people tell me, well, when people pay for 6 months at a time, I get more cash flow upfront, right? But let me tell you something. When you pay for somebody, when you pay for something for a large amount upfront, you expect some kind of discount because you're committing and you're paying a bigger amount upfront, right? And I see sometimes some schools that do 3 or 6 months contract, right? And first of all, by the way, their policies are complicated, and I'm going to talk about streamlining your policy. If you have 5 different ways you can sign up, and the 3 months contract, the 6 months contract, and monthly payment, too complicated, right? But for those who do, when you do a 3 or 6 months commitment, guess what? They give you a 5, 10, 20% discount. So you're basically you're not really locking down your customer. You're making your policy and your enrollment more complicated, which will induce some churn in your admin staff and some complication training other staff, and we'll talk about that. And I say you're not really locking your customer because if they want to leave, they'll leave and ask for a prorated refund at the very least, or you'll have some drama to enforce it. And you give them you leave money on the table. So that customer that would have stayed 6 months anyway, now is going to pay 20% less for their lesson. So basically you borrowed money at a 20% rate, right? And I know rates are a little bit high right now, but you can still get a business loan for a lot less than 20%, right? So why, give a 20% discount to students to get them hooked on the product, on your service that they're gonna get hooked on anyway if they're serious about it, right? And giving them a 20%. So I could expand. Those are the main reasons, right? And the last point is in terms of how your school gets valued. I know a lot of people don't look at selling their school. And I talk to people who buy schools because they usually switch them to Opus 1.io after they buy them when they're not on Opus 1.io. So we talk a lot with some of these people in the industry that buy schools. When you say, okay, I'm buying a school with 500 students, you can calculate the average churn you'll get, per year, right? But if you have these students on a term billing every 6 months or on group classes that end or continue every 3 or 6 months, you know that you have to re-enroll all those students. So you haven't really, your product is basically less sticky. You have to work harder to get all these students re-enrolled on a regular basis, whereas if they continue on a monthly basis, it's just much easier to deal with. So it has a higher value from a business perspective, right? So that's I know most music school owners don't think about selling their school, but eventually you'll retire. Eventually you might want to sell them. You want to build a business that is scalable and that grows in value, because at some point, even if you're not thinking about it now, you might sell it in the future. Does that make sense? I know there's a lot of points there that I made. So I don't know if you have any question or counterparty.
No, I think that's clear. Nate, is there anything that you wanted to jump in there and talk about before we go to the next point?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to highlight, Sam, that you brought in at the tail end there, this idea of when an outside perspective on the value of your business as it's grown, that can be super valuable. And Daniel and I have done some really nice episodes on if you want to create and build a music school that's ready to sell. So let's now go to a couple of your other points then, because I think when you talk about a monthly billing system and you make a really strong argument for why that's valuable, what we're essentially doing as business owners is creating predictable revenue. And once we start creating predictable and forecastable revenue, then we can start creating predictable and forecastable operating budgets.
Exactly.
And I know a couple of the points you wanted to talk about were around how to actually manage your operations, what you're budgeting, where you're budgeting it. I wonder if we could go there next.
Just going back, but you made a very good point about predictability in the business, right? So it's when you have, of course, we can talk about more details like what happens during the summer, right? There's different ways and strategies to deal with summer. At my school, we allow people to go on a summer hold, so we let them put the subscription on pause for a month or two because we found that it's inevitable. You cannot just keep people through the summer. But what we do though is we let them put their subscription on hold and we have them prepay from the month they come back. So they're committed to come back. So we don't have to re-enroll them. They love their teacher. They love their time with their teacher. There's different strategies around that, but at least for us, the sweet spot has been talking about the summer, because I know it's a question that comes back in terms of how do you keep the students in forever. There's always going to be summer and time where they have to take some time off. But usually, at least if you do let them go on hold or on pause, either because they broke their arm or because it's the summer or sort of things like that, make sure they're still on. You just suspend or pause their subscription and you prepay them, or you get them already, in for August or September, right? So think about try to keep your students in instead of, unenrolling them and having to re-enroll them. And maybe that time will not work because the teacher time will not be available at that time.
There's another point you made, Sam, to me that I really want to stress. And it was actually something that I feel like I intuitively knew, but when you and I were talking privately and just in a private conversation, I thought everybody needs to hear this. And this is the idea of how many programs or instruments you have in your school. Let's please go there. We have to get this in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also want to touch on makeup policies because that's also a big pain point of music school. So let's try to hit those two. So the streamlining your product offering, I found, has a lot of benefits. My school, even when we were, we had 1,400 students today, even when we were at 600-700 students, we were really focusing on 3 or 4 key instruments: piano, violin, guitar, and voice. And we're trying not to do anything else. We actually try to do saxophone and clarinet and other instruments. And while from a education perspective, it sounds like, hey, let's do as many instruments as we can. We can touch more students and everything. from a business perspective, it's actually not a good idea, right? Why is that? Because, so let's say you have 10 teachers, or let's take a small example. Let's say you have only 5 teachers. If each of them teach a different instrument and one of them gets sick, who can sub for the one that gets sick? None of them, because they teach different instruments, right? So whereas if you have 5 teachers and let's say they all 5 do piano, it's much easier for makeups, right? For things like that. So when the teacher gets sick, when they take time off, you have other teachers that can sub. So having a reduced set of instruments helps you streamline your operations. There's plenty of other examples like that. Now, of course, as you grow a few hundred students, 1,000 students, then maybe you can add cello, maybe a couple. We actually did add cello over time, but guess what? Today with cello, actually, we only have, I think, 2 cello teachers. They're completely full, and customers are complaining they can't find makeup time. If one of them take time off, we lose money. Whereas for piano, we always have a new piano teacher starting that can do makeup and subbing. So we found that by focusing on maybe the most sought after instruments and having not too many options. And yes, we're going to lose students that come in and want to do French horn or another less sought after instrument. But from a pure business perspective, less instruments, more streamlined operations around those instruments, and having teachers that can sub for one another, that's a great thing to do. Now, beyond instruments, the number of services you offer, whereas it's, I have a piano lesson 30 minutes, I have a guitar lesson 45 minutes. Also, try to reduce the number of services you offer. So that goes back to streamlining your operations and your pricing. I see schools that they have so many different combination of instruments, durations, levels, pricing. And when we set up their services in Opus One IO, we're like, okay, hold on, you have more services than you have customers, right? That doesn't add up. You should have a lot more customers than you have services, right? So I'm slightly exaggerating, and sometimes we caricaturize it a little bit that way. But yeah, you need a simple menu, right? And I know from an artistic perspective, I hate to compare our business to McDonald's, but you want a simple, streamlined menu, right? You should have 4 or 5 options on your menu, and make it simple. It helps you scale. It helps you have a simple pricing, a simple policy that when you hire new staff, it's easy to train them on, right? If you need a PhD in makeup policies to work at your school, you got to struggle finding people, who can work at your school, and you're going to have some problems. So streamlining operations, and I guess that brings us to our next topic, which is makeup policies. Makeups is the biggest pain points of music school. I'll be honest with you. The reason why I quit my job and built Opus One IU is because we wanted to offer a lot of flexibility on makeups at my school, but we were kind of saturating and drowning in activity at 400 or 500 students, maybe actually a bit less at the time. And we could not, we were trying to offer a lot of flexibility with makeups, but it wasn't manageable, right? And we knew a lot of other schools were just basically kind of said no makeups or only 2 makeups a year. They were very strict about it. Well, guess what? If you're too strict about it, you're only going to have a very narrow size of your market. You're only going to be dealing with the students that are the most serious, dedicated, and piano will always be a higher priority for them above everything else. But guess what? The majority of the market is not like that. So if you want to have more students in your school, and also, not just from a business perspective, but, share your passion of music with more people than just the most dedicated ones. Our tagline at my school is everybody deserves music, right? So, we want to expand our service, not just because we want to make more money, but because we want to touch more students. Right. Well, so having a friendly makeup policy will allow you to keep students actually longer and a wider variety of students. Now, how do you make it manageable? Again, automating it. Opus One IU handles self-cancellation with different policies that can be configured, different limits, self-rescheduling of lessons. And we end up with a situation, I could expand on that. That could be a whole episode on its own, where you provide the flexibility of being able to cancel and reschedule lessons within limits, right? There's still some limits. The system enforces all of that. 90% of my cancellations and makeups at my school are completely automated through Opus One IU, and so it is for a lot of our Opus One IU customers. And then basically we don't have overhead on our staff. So we can still have 4 admins handling 1,400 students, and we don't need like 8 or 10 admins because we're crawling with hundreds of SMS or emails per day. My team essentially handles only the exceptions. They don't handle the day-to-day overhead. That's done completely online. So I would say having a easy to understand, that's besides putting aside the flexibility and the tool you use, having a makeup policy that's easy to understand. You wouldn't believe the craziness sometimes I hear about how people do makeups. It's so complicated. Like if you lost me, who've been working at a music school now for 15 years and build a software for music school. And I can't understand your makeup policy in 1 minute. Then what do you think your average mom who deal with 5 other establishments, for different type of kids activities is gonna understand your makeup policy? And your new staff that you just hired, right? How are they gonna learn that policy and enforce it? So having a simple, streamlined policy and a flexible policy where you're generous with a system that makes it manageable. I think I've seen that's the ultimate things that, what really helped us take my school from about 400 students before Opus 1.io to 1,000 more students is because none of these schools in our area could offer the level of flexibility we could offer. And we made it manageable that we could run with a lot less staff than they did, and have the value with it.
There's just a point I want to make following those two things, because you talked about simplicity in programs, simplicity in makeup policy. And the point I want to make, and just to really drive it home, because I agree with that, is that oftentimes the reasons that school owners get stuck in this quagmire between 100 to 300 students or 100 to 250 students is that they increase the complexity of their offerings, they increase the complexity of their policies, their billing policies, their makeup policies, because, and this isn't true of all of them. So, I'm not trying to throw shade here, but a lot of times it's because they're on the policy side, they're trying to avoid the emotionally difficult work of saying no to their own customers.
Yes.
Like, in other words, things get really complicated because they're trying to find ways to avoid making people unhappy, which shows kind of a fundamental lack of self-confidence in the offerings of the school. That's that side. And on the other side, there's oftentimes what I've noticed, again, in doing a lot of business coaching with a lot of different school owners of all different academy sizes, is that the reason why they're offering all these different instruments, the reason they can't say no to all these different instruments and different programs is because they fundamentally don't have confidence in their marketing. They don't believe in their own marketing abilities, and they think they have to add all these instruments just so they can get more students in the door, because they can't go deep on 3 instruments, so they think they'll go wide with 12. And what it does is just gets them so stuck. So I totally see what you're talking about there.
Yeah, and you said it very eloquently. I mean, knowing how to say no to business is tough. Whether it's saying no to a customer who wants, a last minute same day cancellation. I mean, that's, arguable. Sometimes you may want to do exceptions to retain a customer. But if somebody says, well, we only want lesson at our home, well, you say no to that, because your teacher that's going to drive to people's home, they're going to burn out. They're going to cost you a lot more. You're going to schedule less lessons. I mean, we have some customers who do home lessons and they're successful at it. That's great for them. But when we did that, the reason my wife started her music school, because she hated driving to people's home. She was wasting so much time in traffic. It was not efficient.
Yeah, so absolutely.
We say no to home lessons. Yes, sometimes we lose business, but guess what? None of them end up still coming to the studio. And if they only want to do home lessons, it's just not for us, right? Or if we would offer it, we would make it a lot more expensive because it has a lot more overhead. But somebody wants to do every other week lessons. Well, I'm sorry, we don't do that, right? So there are certain things that we choose not to do, and we have to say no and be strict. I'll give you another example. That was another tips and trick that I use is we decided at some point that one was a little bit risky, and I don't see a lot of schools do it, but it worked very well for us. We decided saying no to people who wanted to do 30 minutes lessons. We made it only for kids under 8 years old. So we're like, okay, if you're under 8 years old, you don't have the attention span, so we're going to let you do 30 minutes lessons. But if you're 8 and above, it's 45 minutes minimum. Guess what? I was bracing. I was a little bit worried that it might be difficult. And it worked out great. And what we ended up having, the reason we did that is because 45 minutes lesson gives you a more meaningful, longer lesson. Obviously, from a business perspective, it's also better revenue per customer. So these are the type of metrics you care about in most businesses, but music schools don't usually look at revenue per customer. And if you have a teacher that you pay the same amount of hours teaching 4 students instead of 8, they're going to burn out a lot less. They're still teaching the same amount of hours. They're doing more meaningful, longer lessons where they can talk about exam. They can talk to mom, instead of mom expecting to have time between lessons, which the teachers don't have. They can talk to mom at the end of the lesson. So you have a longer and more meaningful lesson. You have more revenue per customer, and you have less burnout for teachers. So that's an example where streamlining things and making sometimes bold decisions helped us a lot. Streamlining and doing things. And now we have to say no to sometimes people who say, well, I only want to do 30 minutes. My kid is 12 years old. And we say, we're sorry, we have to be strict on that. I mean, we do an example. We do an exception for kids with special needs, because sometimes you could be 12-year-olds that have special needs, and then we have to make accommodations. So we do that the exception. So usually we ask parents, does your kid have special needs? No, we're sorry, it's gonna be 45 minutes minimum. And we have to say no sometimes, and it's tough to do. And just like you said, we discussed, somebody comes in and they want to learn, I don't know, another instrument. And, I've seen schools that have a teacher that maybe they teach guitar, and they want, that's something that we don't do, and I see a lot of schools do. Not necessarily the best performing schools is having a teacher teaching instrument that is not really their major. There's only so long that teacher is going to go with that student, right? So if you're not really a piano teacher and you're a guitar major and you can teach only beginners piano, don't have that teachers teach piano, because guess what? After 6 months or 1 year, they won't have a lot to teach to that student anymore, and that student's just going to plateau and then not continue, right? So now you have churn, right? You want to avoid churn. So, I mean, there's plenty of things we can say, but saying no and streamlining your products, streamlining what you offer, and being strict about your policy once you have found, and just kind of doubling down on what works. Make your business scalable and repeatable, or make your business scalable by making it repeatable, right? Adding another thing in your business repeatable, right? Is maybe just adding another product to your menu. If piano works well for you and you have demand for piano, hire more piano teachers, and it's going to be easier for them to sub for one another, right? Instead of adding, flute, right? Because you're going to have maybe a lot less demand for flute, and now who's going to sub for that flute teacher? So that's just one example. There's a lot to say on that topic, and I don't know how much time we have left if you have any questions, and I kind of touched a lot of different points on this while we were talking about it. But sometimes you have to make bold decisions and know how to say no.